Okay, guys, welcome back. We're in another AI conversation, and I'm here with obviously one of my favorite conversation partners, Professor Ben Teehankee, a good friend, mentor of mine, and he actually got this large language model discussion going several months ago, owing to his CV getting misinterpreted. So, welcome back, Professor Ben.
Pleasure to be with you again, Doc.
Yeah, sige. So I think last time we chatted, we were in the middle of lots of interesting threads about economic growth and automation and all that, no? So I don't know, maybe you want to pick it up from there and let's see how far we can get.
Sure. I wanted to show again yung slides natin on growth, right?
Yep.
Because I think we can build the argument from there. Right? So if we review this, you see Philippine data on the left and then ASEAN comparative data on the right. So dito on the left, we can see the red line indicating increasing labor productivity in the Philippines, right? Pero in the same graph, and also in the same graph, you can see real wage, which is relatively flat here. Now, the green line is the real wage, right?
Mhm.
So right away you can see a disconnect between productivity increases and real wage. And this is a violation of a basic economic principle that labor should get the just share of their productivity.
Correct.
Now, if we look at comparative situation for our some of our neighbors, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, you see that the situation is even worse because if you look at real wages in these countries, you can see an upward trend.
So tayo dyan, we're the flat line, I guess.
Yeah, in fact, there was even a dip around 2006 down. We're barely recovering now, the gray line.
Oo.
Okay, so you have an internal issue of equity, meaning my friend Dan, uh, a former IMF economist, Dan Villanueva, calls this social extraction. It's a
Social extraction.
yeah, it's a socially extractive situation, meaning we have structured society so that the main gains from productivity do not go to the workers themselves. It is extracted from them. And comparatively, in other countries, we have seen that because of their more distributive system, we have seen growth in their middle class. So this graph, we were discussing this last time, this is the proportion of middle class across different Asian countries.
Grabe yung Thailand, oh, tsaka Vietnam. It's amazing.
Yeah, the trajectory is amazing. But the Malaysia and Thailand in particular brought their poverty below 10% as early as the early 2000s.
Right.
Tayo, we missed our commitment to the Millennium Development Goals in 2015, di ba? Kasi ang kinomit natin was 15% poverty. We missed it, no? We were barely below, no, we were 21, I think 22%. So we
Parang
missed
hindi
it by
nagbabudge, no?
several. Yeah, well, we were inching down, I suppose. In fact, the way the economists depicted it was like this: poverty reduction for the Philippines was inching down ever so
Yung
slowly.
iba, dramatic drop, no?
Yung iba medyo dramatic. Of course, we're speaking across at least 2 decades now. But it's really striking. So if you look at these pictures together, the lack of sharing of the gains of productivity with workers, the slow reduction in poverty, and the very, very slow increase in the middle class, we have a situation. Now, because our population is also growing, the conclusion is very clear. We need to have a more inclusive industrial policy, which means we will achieve the growth because some economists have said that we need to grow by at least 7% for 7 consecutive years. I think the initial data from the first half, or is it the first quarter of 2023, is more than 7%. But of course, when the year ends, they calculate that for the whole year, right? You could have a very strong quarter, pero kung mahina naman yung the other 3 quarters, pabagsak din yun. So, but what we need is 7% growth over 7 years consecutively. But not just the growth, we need the distribution. Ang problema natin yung distribution. Because in the past, even when we were achieving mga 6.5% growth, the distribution was really bad, which is why the middle class wasn't growing.
I
Now
don't
this
know.
is,
Do you
go
have
ahead.
data on ano? Just thinking out loud. I'm trying to make sense of the moving parts. Kasi if the thesis is we have an extractive economy, the immediate thought in my head is it's a structural problem, meaning it could be a structural problem, meaning we're an economy dominated by relatively few incumbents. Kaya the value gets stuck there, no? When I talk about incumbents, I don't know, conglomerates, that kind of structure. Whereas I'm guessing lang, whereas in other countries, you have potentially a very, very burgeoning small and medium enterprise entrepreneurial growth, which tends to create more value than it extracts rather than ano. And then we follow the thesis again that most people are employed by MSMEs. Wala talagang trickle down yung ano, yung value ng economy sa kanila.
Yeah,
It's really stuck in these big that's my guess. Is it's
yeah.
stuck in these
I
big
think the
incumbents.
structural question you're raising is the most important one. So if we look at it very carefully, the conglomerates, of course, which are led by major family groups in the Philippines, right? They're already the beneficiaries of the structural situation. They did
Correct.
not create the structural situation.
Yep.
I always like the analogy of a buffet, right? If you arrive at Vikings from a buffet, some tables are closer to the buffet table and other tables are farther.
Correct.
So those who randomly get assigned the tables nearest to the buffet
You get
table,
more food.
yes, benefit from the structure. They did not create the structure. Pero
Oh,
syempre, once they're there, if they're not mindful, every time they go for roast beef, they get just a little bit more because they may not be thinking of everybody else in the back, right? So that's the structural issue. But the structure of the economy is the more interesting thing. Actually, yung employment, yung MSME, kasama kasi dyan yung mga agriculture. If you
right.
look at the structure of jobs in the Philippines, the two biggest groups
Employers.
of jobs are agriculture and retail,
Right.
meaning farmers and sales people. So if you look at the structure of the economy, these are very low value creating jobs, meaning you cannot uplift yourself in these jobs unless we can make them very, very productive. What
Yeah.
comes to mind, for example, is, if you go to the US, there's a Nordstrom department store. If you compute the average revenue on a per salesperson basis of Nordstrom, it's huge. It's
Yeah.
about 10 times a typical department store. Why is that? Because a salesperson in the Nordstrom store is so well trained that when he or she attends to a customer, the
Dami niya
breadth
nagagawa.
the breadth of knowledge, the cross-referencing, the mastery of technology, inventory systems, etc. In other words, you don't get a typical response like, "Oh, sorry, sir, we don't have that." Which happens here. If you go to stores or even bookstores, you say, "Do you have this?" "Sorry, sir, we don't have that." They
Does
don't
the
even they don't even recommend. So what now? What do I do now? Right?
I have a question also. If you go back to your slide 14, no, if I'm seeing right, I'm really enamored by that growth line that seems to come at either at the expense of or to the total exclusion of wages. Does the labor productivity here include BPOs? Would that be
Yes.
part of it?
Yes, I believe so. Pero remember, this is all labor kasi.
All labor.
So, all
Weighted
labor.
average.
Yeah, in a way, there is a waiting issue kasi ang dami-daming sales ladies and ang dami-daming ano. But still, if you look at it, technology enabled din naman yan eh. Which
Yeah,
means that well, from a literal point of view, they just divide kasi revenue by number of employees.
by number of employees. Yeah,
It's just a very crude index, di ba?
yeah.
So meaning so much more is being produced by tapping fewer and fewer. In,
And
in a
then
way, that's
GDP,
a
right?
danger.
So this excludes OFW productivity.
Yeah, I think this is local
Oh,
ito.
okay.
Kasi GDP ito, GDP. So
Oh,
the thing here is that what now can we do to achieve a better alignment of the real wage to the productivity, but
yeah.
at the same time, if we're impressed with the red line, how do we make the slope of that double?
Mm.
Yun ang challenge. How do we make that even double? And then make sure that that increase in productivity leads to, if you look at this
A bigger
Philippine
middle
line
class.
here,
Yeah.
yeah, this middle class line should swoop up like this. we have to approximate the Vietnamese trajectory. Look at this trajectory of Vietnam. My gosh,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we need to do.
It's practically like the China graph, if you look at it.
Yes, yes. Now, I'm glad you mentioned China because this is where manufacturing comes in.
Uh-huh.
It is almost impossible to achieve this without growing a vibrant manufacturing sector.
Yeah.
Because the nice thing about manufacturing is you don't need college education. If you have basic K to 12, you can be employed in a factory, you follow rules, you have the proper work ethic, etc., etc. If you have an over-educated or over-college obsessed population where everybody wants to have an office job, which is what we have, or a BPO job, which is what we have, your economy, this is another structural point, ano? Kasi if you look at agriculture, industry, meaning manufacturing and services as three legs of a stool, those legs have to be more or less balanced. Eh.
Now I'm
If,
also thinking out loud, no, na
yeah.
I'm still reflecting on the point about structural
Mm.
challenges. So tama ka, retail and agri are your local. Basically, people work
Bulk.
locally for local
Mm.
value.
Yes.
While you have three sectors of the economy, the OFW, the manufacturing, and even BPOs, who work largely for basically external productivity. You know, we don't get the benefit from it other than siguro the gross reserves, no, that we earn
Yes.
from these
And it's
industries.
GDP.
Yeah.
GDP yun. Oo.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are threatened as well, no? Kasi nung nagka-pandemic, we were very vulnerable. Marami tayong OFWs na umuwi, di ba?
Yeah, and I don't know
So,
nga kung bumawi na eh. Last I checked, which was early middle of last year, the external revenue graph has yet to come back to 2019
I
levels.
have not seen the latest eh.
Uh,
Ang alam ko, yung sa BPO, bumawi na ng konti,
the
no? Kasi
BPOs are up
nasa
na. Mm.
30 up na naman eh. Kasi ang baseline yan, mga 30 billion. So I think it's around 38 now,
Yeah.
which is good. But agriculture really is a major issue.
It's a hurdle. It's a hurdle.
Yeah, we need to address food security. Again, if we look at human development, yung food is essential, and that's what drives inflation. Eh. Kaya nga every time we need to address itong ating rice issue, which is so complicated, it's so complex if you combine it with the smuggling
Yeah.
issue as
I don't
well.
want to make it parang political, but I was always curious about, and I don't know to what extent this is still true, Ilocos region is at a surplus for rice and several other commodities. No? It's one of the few who are agriculturally, according to the stats at least, no? They produce more than they consume. So I don't know if it's just purely a function of konti lang yung tao doon and you have a lot of food being produced, or there's something else at play there. Versus vis-a-vis, let's say, pretty much everywhere else where you are at a deficit and you have to import everything from sugar to rice to onions. So I'm wondering, is it just because of that na ano lang talaga? And then notwithstanding the cartels and the smuggling, that's obviously a problem. It must really be
Well,
that bad, no? If agriculture hasn't improved, no, in over the years, no?
Well, I think it simply reflects a lack of a coherent industrial policy.
Yeah,
Because let's face it, if you don't have a coherent industrial policy that is enforced by government, then people will take advantage. It's human nature. Eh.
yeah, it's just economics, right? People
Yeah,
find a way.
people are, as they say, people are rational. Even in a buffet, which is my favorite example, you may not have gotten your share of your roast beef. But then as the buffet closes, you see somebody being given a plastic full of roast beef because kaibigan niya yung yung nagsaserve eh.
Mm-hmm.
See? And that in a nutshell is what that's called rent seeking, by the way. Rent
Correct.
seeking means those who are influential are able to lobby or even sometimes take advantage of government regulation to be exempt from it.
I think ano nga
Yun
eh.
ang challenge eh.
To, to,
Oo.
to a certain extent, I believe this. I don't know how much of it to be true, but if you have rentier economics, it's inherently not innovative. Kasi a
Yeah.
large part of capital is paying rent. Basically,
Yes,
you're
yes.
betting on the government to keep
Yeah.
you a monopoly or something. But And
Yeah.
then samahan mo na ng cronyism, no? That's another complexity. So
Yeah.
over the years, basically the money or the capital that would have invested in AI and all these automation are just invested in perpetuating the
Yes.
status quo. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter who sits, basta merong
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're in the front row of a buffet, you don't
you wanna
care
let
as
go.
long as you're always in front, right? Pero the point nga is the government now, let's face it, there's corruption naman everywhere. In
Yeah.
Korea, two of their presidents have been, imprisoned. One of the presidents even died in jail, right? Corporate executives are jailed for corruption.
Yeah.
Samsung is a huge jailball, and yet the chairman of their board was convicted. So it's not that we have a monopoly on all of these problems. What we have is a lack of enforcement. We don't have the moral will, and it's not in our stomach. Filipinos don't have the stomach to really punish because we're soft-hearted.
Yeah.
We're that way. So I think while that is being addressed, I don't know if we will ever learn to really mete out penalties. No? But in the meantime, because even though there's corruption, we can still be productive. The important thing is to make sure that the productivity is distributed. That's why my favorite example is what we did for telecommunications. When telecommunications was deregulated, that planted the seed for everything else that followed, di ba?
Yeah.
Kasi everyone could get a phone.
Internet connection, a phone,
Oh, and
etc.
then later on, everyone could get a cell phone. Oh, when that happened, when 3G, 4G, and 5G rolled out, everybody could have access to it. So reforms, you can put it on top of reforms, and you can put it on top of reforms. And so when fintech kicked in, and now we have AI, everything is now ready. But you need people to be educated on what AI can and cannot do. That's why I thought it would be good to define certain terms when we talk about this. For example, we talk about ethics all the time. For me, it's fundamental. No? Ethics is just the principles and standards of right and wrong conduct in a certain community. So when we're speaking of AI ethics, we're just saying, is it right to deploy a particular tool to so many people when certain risks have not been mitigated or have not been disclosed, or there is no quick way to recall or to stop, right? So those are ethical issues. Is it right? Is it wrong? Now, of course, that will be debated unless government steps in and creates a law. But in the meantime, there has to be some level of self-control. That's why engineers, when they build bridges, they're guided by ethics. They
Yeah.
always ask themselves, is this safe? I don't know if you heard of this situation in New York. They have the Citigroup building. They designed it and they built it, and they found out it had a structural defect, meaning high-powered winds could topple the whole thing.
Wow, talaga?
Yeah, yeah, you can look this up because Lemis Mesurier was the chief structural, the engineer in charge of it.
Sa New
But
York?
see,
That
yes, yeah, because I've seen that building and it had a serious structural defect because the land on which the building was standing had a church and they could not ask the church to move.
okay. This
So,
is really
yeah,
ancient history, 1978 City Park
yes, yes,
Center.
yes,
Okay.
yes. So, because of that, traditionally, the major feet of the building should be at the four corners, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the design of that building, they're in the middle of each side.
So may mali talaga with
Well,
the location.
actually, they found a way to solve it, but in the execution, they made a serious mistake, Doc. It should have been welded, meaning
Yeah, yeah.
these what they did was to bolt them.
And
So
that creates
apparently,
a natural
yes.
parang
So it was weak.
vulnerability.
It was weak. And you know who found it out? A graduate student.
Okay. Okay.
And this is exactly the same thing that happened with the Volkswagen emission scandal, right?
Yeah, I remember.
Volkswagen was cheating, and who found it out? A professor and his students. That's why independent review is so important, especially from academe, from civil service organizations, like AAP, etc. We need to, we need to participate in what's happening, not just watch.
So wait, I wanna dig on this kasi it's a good jump
Mm.
off from.
Mm.
So we have these structural issues. Okay, full stop. Let's set that aside.
Yes.
I don't know if this is mga false equivalents, but one issue that keeps popping up, let's say in social media, the unwillingness to regulate social media despite its obvious parang harms, no?
Yeah.
And one of the opinions, just an opinion, is that you can't rely on a government to regulate something that they benefited from. Never mind who that was, no? And or a government to stop disinformation who then benefited from disinformation. So yun, parang I don't know if that's a question of conflict of interest or moral hazard. No, that's one. And then this thing you're mentioning about regulating AI or regulating yan buildings, that requires again the effort of government.
Yeah.
But then,
Definitely.
if we're back to that issue of very weak structural, basically it's a weak government. It's a weak design where there's not much accountability, there's not much enforcement. It's a it's kind of a weak compliance culture. Like everyone just follows the rules, but in case someone breaks the rules, there's no mitigation or there's no audit. Or there is an audit function, but it's kind of after the fact na, no? It's not really at point. Kumbaga sa risk management, it's not at the first line of defense. You're relying on the third line of defense to figure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's put it this way. Because of rent seeking and government being terribly under-resourced,
Mhm.
I mean, just to paint the picture, the SEC is supposed to oversee all of the biggest corporations, right? In fact, all corporations. But you will remember that the main office of the SEC for the longest time was in Ortigas. That was a condemned building.
Yeah, I remember that. Are they still
Imagine
there?
that. No,
Okay.
no, they're now in Makati. But
Mati.
I used to remind them because I'm an admirer of the SEC. They play a vital role. But how can you? It's like you're a security guard. You're
What's
guarding
your
a major.
moral, ano, no?
You're
Ascendancy.
guarding a major mall, and yet your 38 caliber, it doesn't even fire.
Uh,
And by the way, this was also the reason that the SEC in the United States said it could not really supervise all of the rogue corporations in the US because the budget of the SEC in the US is huge, but compare that to the budget of the corporations over which it oversees, there's no comparison. That's why every 5 years there are major scandals that break out. When Silicon Valley Bank broke out, I was not surprised. There's just no way that the government on its own can oversee business misbehavior. This is why the two other pillars come in, Doc. And what am I referring to? Civil society organizations like AAP and the educational sector and media, meaning independent media. No, I'm not talking about media that is beholden to the corporate groups.
Sino
No,
kaya yun?
well, you have to, in the case of Enron, you will remember, it was Tiffany Bethany McLean, an investigative reporter from Fortune magazine. She was the first one to challenge Enron's business model because she couldn't figure it out. Every time she would attend the analyst meeting, she would be told, well, it would be implied that she wasn't bright enough to understand, right? Because what Enron was saying was they were applying such an ahead the curve business model that this is the future and government doesn't understand it, so they defer to us. And that was actually true, Doc. Government did not know how to regulate a lot of the new structured finance products. So
Yeah.
what they
Financial
what
engineers, no? Yeah.
yes, what they did was they asked the financial engineers, how do you want us to regulate you? And then the financial engineers gave the formula to government. And
Mm.
government used the formula. It's like you ask the convicts, how do you want us to lock you up? And then the
Like
convict said, oh, you
asking
use
the
this.
fox on what to do with the hens.
Yes, you use this type of padlock so you can secure us. No, I'm
Well,
not making this up. You cannot make this up. This is exactly what happened. Now, here we are again with AI. We're saying government is not the most competent that we can grant, but government is government. We're a democratic country. Well, the way China did it, because they have a one-party system and they have absolute control, they clamped down, right? They controlled all social media. They control all traffic. So they did it. Now, the West always says, oh, we want to regulate big tech. Oh, we want to regulate big oil. But because they're so compromised and there's so much rent seeking, they can't do it. See? The problem is all of the misbehavior spill out to other countries.
right.
Because the American government cannot regulate a Facebook, guess what? Many of the young people with health problems because of Facebook and Insta and all of this are in Asia.
Yeah. Yeah, sige.
Oh,
I'll take that point na parang ano yan eh. The civil society takes over pag ano, you have
compliments. Well, I think the buzzword now, and this sitting government uses it a lot, is a whole of society approach.
correct.
For me, that's not just propaganda, although it sounds like propaganda, right?
Like sounds
It
like a
it's
cop out and
it's a fundamental sociological reality.
yeah.
It takes a village, so everybody has to.
And
If you or I notice that government isn't doing something, we have to call it out and we have to make recommendations. That's
yeah,
why if there are
yeah,
public forums, we have to be there.
where I want to come in, and this,
Mhm.
let me know if this makes sense, no. It's gonna be jumping around. When you have, it's like it's the classic tug of war between government, which is kind of an immovable object dapat, no. You have the rule of law. And if in the absence of that, it becomes a market dynamic. I'm wondering though, to what extent even civil society and even media are subject to this market dynamic. Like for example, like kunyari, the loss of ABS-CBN, that was a direct intervention by government to kind of remove media. So ngayon, it's kind of a stilted market in media right now. Everyone's either afraid of speaking out or whatnot. No, that's been true for a while. And then civil society also needs some sort of its own mechanism to motivate people apart from the obvious now. Okay, you can make more money if you do this. I don't even know if that's even the case. Eh. Like let's be specific. What's AAP's real motivation anyway? No, to put some order into. I mean, I can't answer that for them. No, but I'm wondering, there has to be some
Well,
real
Well,
value or incentive.
you're a leader. I'm a member. We define that together. I
Yep.
believe certainly when AAP incorporated, the purposes were there, right, in the Articles of Incorporation. But to your original question, if you look at human needs, kasi, we have to face the music. We all are driven by material needs, right?
Yeah.
So because of that, we are all part of the economy. We are all part of the self-interest seeking component of human dynamics. But we use that ideally to become better human beings. The problem is corruption is really when our self-interest dominates and then we forget our role in society. For example, if I'm a teacher and my student is struggling, but he says, "Oh, why don't I just treat you to, a trip to Hong Kong and, bahala ka na sa akin." This kind of thinking, right? So, but the point here is that the economy is like the air we breathe. It affects all of us. The
Yeah.
point is for us to do it in a way that benefits everybody else. Wala namang masama eh. Everybody needs it eh. We need to survive and therefore material needs are preeminent. In fact, all of nung nag-collapse yung, Arab Spring, di ba? More than 8 countries use social media to topple their governments. Kasi nga, their basic needs were already not being met, right? Of course, nag-react ang China because it saw the handwriting on the wall. I mean, if that can happen to so many countries in the Middle East, it can happen here. That's why they swung the pendulum naman to the other side kasi they still had the Tiananmen in their memory, right? So tayo naman, we're not naman saying that we're trying to delegitimize government. Eh. We're saying we are part of government. We're not saying naman na it's not good to be seeking, income or a good lifestyle for our families. No, in fact, we want everybody's lifestyles to be good. Ang point natin is let's get on with the program. And the program is really productivity. The only sustainable way to achieve national development is through productivity. The other way is through rent seeking and oligopolies. It's just only for a few. And alam naman natin, we're so gentle-hearted. We will never have a revolution in this country. Hindi tayo ganun eh. Although we were the first actually to have a revolution in Asia, no? That's on record. 1898, the Malolos Republic was established by the first revolution in Asia. We were the first. But after that, we didn't want to do it anymore. Our nature is such that we can have a so-called revolution while singing on the streets and then marching to Malacanang. You know, in other countries, if you had EDSA Dos or EDSA Tres and then they're marching to Malacanang, they will do side trips to those rich villages and probably torch some of those houses.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened in other countries. That will never happen here. We're too soft, which is probably good. But you know, when you see the figures naman, this is too much. We have to do something already. That's what we need,
Yeah.
a
You know,
revolution of productivity.
talking about the culture, you made a
Oh,
reference in our last chat to something na medyo classical dimensions na yung Hofstede, for example, where we have a very weird combination of a
social
high,
distance, yeah,
high power distance, so
power
very
distance, yeah,
hierarchical, but we're also low in uncertainty avoidance.
avoidance.
Oh, 'di ba? Parang so you have a very very status centric whatever culture, but then you're very lax on terms of rules, which is compared to something like China, for example, where they also have very high status orientation, pero grabe naman yung compliance culture nila. So in a way, one offsets the other in a way. So tayo, we seem to have kind of the worst combination where it's a very there's a high level of inequity in society that's tolerated by society, but at the same time, we don't seem to want to get on with the program and follow rules.
Yeah, well, we
They're very
shrug our
hard to offset those,
shoulders.
eh. Di ba? Parang ganun.
Yeah, in a way, we shrug our shoulders and say that's the way life is, right?
Yeah.
C'est la vie, which of course is it runs against everything I'm saying. Our destiny is in our hands, but we need a middle class that will own it. Kaya lang, if the middle class is not growing, kasi the middle class has the wherewithal, eh. It has the economic base, meaning it's not so insecure that it cannot make ends meet, di ba? So it can join campaigns, it can join causes, right? So every time the sitting government swings the middle class, it tips, eh.
Yeah.
But you need to grow the middle class. Otherwise, yung C's and D's, they're living day to day, eh.
Yeah, that's
Hirap,
another thing na that's
hirap
kind of
talaga yan.
classical
Oo.
Hofstede din natin yun eh. We have very short-term orientation. Unlike the likes of Singapore and China, they really look like, okay, what's my great-great-grandchildren gonna do? So, and it is what it is, right? Tayo, we live for the moment, I guess, both economically and sociologically.
And
So,
that's something we're trying to change now. Kasi maski yung investment structure natin, there's another structural issue there, right? I mean, less than 3 million Filipinos own capital account investments.
yeah.
So which means you don't have
Walang
a
investment culture. There's no investment culture at all.
yes, and that leads to a very low investment system.
Yeah.
People are really not invested in the system, literally.
No,
Kasi there's
kaya
a
nga
lot
kasi
of
nga value
informality.
extractive
Eh.
eh. Value
Yun na nga eh. So yung informal economy natin, yan ang goal natin. Hopefully, through fintech and AI, we will slowly bring them to the formal sector, meaning they will benefit from everything that it means to be part of the formal sector by
But I have a
convincing
question
them
though.
that it works.
I have a question on that though. Kasi looking at how um let's say telecoms evolved, no? And internet access. I think internet access is probably a good indicator. It took decades, pero right now, with a few exceptions in some geographies, it's pretty much democratized. You can get a phone very cheaply, kahit second-hand phone. You can get a small sachet load, and then you're now online. No, so in a way, access is democratized, but it didn't start out that way. It started out very elitist, very exclusionary. Cell phones were expensive.
Yeah.
Internet connectivity was only in the NCR. So I'm wondering if will AI follow the same trajectory? And if so, this is the point I want to make. Since it's such an exponential type of innovation, baka it doesn't give you enough time not to democratize. Let's say if the benefits and the innovation brought forth by AI starts again at the very top of the society and it gets locked there for a very kahit short time lang, the exponential benefit to that sector relative to the rest. I'm talking about digital divide na ngayon.
Yes.
may be impossible to bridge. I don't know. I'm just talking superlatives to make it more,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad you're using the telco as the reference case here. Kasi I spoke to sila Senator Magsaysay before. Na, co-author siya ni Osmeña when they push for telecommunications deregulation. For them, the law itself was meant to be very inclusive.
Yep.
It was not meant to be locked down. Pero syempre, as usual, when you implement a law that will upend the status quo, syempre, the beneficiaries of the status quo fight back. So they will slow it down para they can, control their losses, etc.
Yep.
In fact, I don't know if you remember, in the early 2000s, even Globe and Smart were not interconnecting very well. You could be talking to your friend and then it will drop every 3 minutes. Ganyan. So the drop call rate was so high.
Mm-hmm.
So ibig sabihin, how do you get two members of a duopoly to say, for the common good, can you guys interconnect?
Yep.
They
Yeah,
were
I remember that problem. They didn't want to
of
connect.
course. Well, they were saying they were doing it, but you and I know that they were not really cooperating.
Yep.
It's like Pepsi and Coke when I was young. You would find trucks of Pepsi bottles all basag-basag. They would break each other's bottles. So ganyan eh. Pero government, this is where government stepped in. And this relates to the ABS-CBN thing. No?
Yep.
Sinabi ng gobyerno na if you guys don't fix this in 15 days, we will cancel both of your franchise. Sinabi talaga ng Congress yun.
Wow, that was an ultimatum, ah.
And
Grabe.
they had the right because a franchise is a sacred permit given to a private entity to
Correct.
serve the public. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter if it's a pedicab, tricycle, a telco, or a television network. A franchise means you have a sacred duty to serve.
Yeah.
But because of your profit interest, you're subverting a common good proposition, which is interconnection. Or maybe for a more recent example, I was very upset when the common terminal in North EDSA was being delayed because Ayala and the SM Group could not agree where the terminal would be closest to. And I was asking myself, oh my God, only in the Philippines. You will hijack everybody in NCR because you guys don't know which malls will make more money from the traffic. For me, the government should have stepped in and says, no, no, no. We're thinking of the maximum benefit for people. So this is where the terminal will go.
Yep.
But this is the Philippines, so the big corporations really had to first agree. I was waiting for that common terminal for the longest time, and they delayed it even further. Kaya ang gusto natin, to your point, I think if we just stick to the spirit of rolling, kasi anyway, what OpenAI showed is, dinemocratize na nga nila eh. Pero the problem is, yung democratization nila was a little bit reckless kasi they put it out in the wild. I don't think that that's the way to do it. In the case of telecommunications, the IEEE standards and all of these things, nakalatag lahat yan eh. And even the designs of cell phone towers, how they can be put in places where they will not harm health, etc. Pinag-aralan lahat yan. So the rollout was very systematic. No? Although, of course, alam natin ngayon, nagbabanggaan na yung mga providers dyan sa mga poste, di ba? Nakiki-ride on ng ano sila sa mga poste ng Meralco. And sometimes they're affecting each other's services na, di ba? Kasi ang dami-dami na nakasalpak eh. I think
Yeah.
they should agree on how to systematically share space on a poste. Kasi I always dread it when one provider is servicing a post. Umakit na tinatanong ko na siya, ano pong ginagawa niyo? Ganyan. Kasi 10 minutes later, down yung ano ko dun sa kabila.
Right.
Oh.
Right.
And then they will say, kasi po, bago itong amin eh. Yung kanila, lumang-luma na yan. Pag makanting mo lang ng konti yan, hindi na gumagana. Well, says them, right? Why don't they have a summit so that they can fix all of that? Better yet, why don't we do BGC where everything is under the, underground? I don't know. Binabaha kasi tayo ng problema.
Actually, another parallel. This is probably more relevant in maybe a year or two, no, when companies start adopting artificial intelligence. Do you remember the life cycle of Uber a few years ago?
All right. Yeah, I have some recollection of
Yeah,
that. Yes.
where they started completely new and people
Yes, yes. That
were
was
skeptical.
exponential, yeah.
That was an exponential one because it really
Yeah.
disrupted taxis and it was using AI, yung surge
Yes,
processing nila.
definitely, yeah.
And And people were willing to pay more. They were willing to pay the Uber
Yeah,
price
yeah,
because they were getting the like I was an Uber
yes,
Black
yes,
customer,
yes,
no? Because I did a lot of
yes.
travel now. And then what happened? And I can't completely blame naman the government for this, no. But they clamped down on Uber. They said you're violating the rules on public transport. Kasi nga the way Uber worked, both the driver and the customer were their clients. So they're just a platform. Pero
Yes,
the
that was
way
their argument. Yeah.
oh, 'di ba? But the way government said, no, you're a transport company and you should be employing your drivers. So
Mm,
they're entitled to benefits, number one. Number
mm,
two, they
mm,
should all have permits, LTFRB. So doon nasira si Uber. So
mm.
I'm just thinking of that no as a parallel structure. Um there will probably come a time where some industry somewhere will start disrupting themselves because now of AI. And then the watchdogs come. No, but I also know that the Uber, of course, this is just hearsay as far as we're concerned. But I know also I heard that the Uber pushback was also politically motivated
It's
because
possible. Yes.
yeah, some politicians owned big taxi franchises and they were losing money like anything because wala nang nabubook na taxi noon. Everyone was going for Uber.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And then
People,
Grab
I
came
mean,
along and then Angkas, they were also
yeah.
subject to massive parang clampdown by the government. So, and then let's go back to that original thesis where we have a government that's generally quote unquote weak
Mm,
in enforcement. How will that play out eventually where on the one hand, yes, Uber was very innovative, it was very disruptive, but I won't say they're not abusive. I think that was abusive also kasi
mm,
people were getting gouged from those prices. I remember somebody was paying
mm.
1,000 pesos just to cross EDSA.
Yeah, yeah,
Parang
yeah.
ganun. And that was algorithms. Kumbaga, that's
Yes,
the world
yes.
of
Kasi
algorithms.
demand driven eh. Oo.
Demand-driven siya and
Oo.
absurd na yung supply-demand
Yeah, yeah.
balance. Eh. So
Well,
paano yun? I mean, how do you think that will go? And as early as now, how do you anticipate that? No?
well, in the first place, that's a classic case. No? Kasi as I said, franchise yun eh. Taxi franchises were already there, but let's face it, if drivers were not being taken care of by the system and the cars themselves were not being maintained, so the taxi system was really in decay, right? Even though the mission of the taxi system was to serve the public, the average passenger complains of being refused or uh, terrible smelling cabs, etc. So kaya nag ano yung ride sharing yung ano because if you go to countries like Singapore for example, they really are so strict on their taxi services that taxi drivers have to earn certificates every year, not just for driving, but they even have to know all of the menus of the top restaurants in Singapore so that if you're a tourist and you come and say, oh, where's the best Italian meal? You know, taxi drivers know because they
Yeah,
have to. This is what I mean. You're not just a taxi driver, you're educated to be a highly productive mobile transport concierge.
yeah, exactly. You're
This
part
is
of
what I'm
the
saying.
transport experience.
Yes. And you're a concierge. Kasi dito sa Pilipinas, extractive nga eh. If you own a fleet of taxis, what you do is you get as much profit from it from paying the least to your drivers. Eh anong ginagawa yung driver mo? De binabarog yung taxi mo. Right? Paano siya magmamalasakit dun sa taxi mo kung siya nga hindi siya pinagmamalasakitan? Kaya pag sakay mo sa taxi, ang sama-sama ng amoy, yung shocks niya hindi na gumagana, who would want to ride that?
It's a horrible user experience for them.
Exactly. So, ang point nga natin sa innovation is just that you have to just think of human need. Eh.
Yeah.
What do people need? This is not
Hindi yan. That
nuclear
would
physics
work.
eh.
I think
Oh.
that would work in a more efficient market environment. Philippines is not that efficient. We tolerate inefficient market situations for a long time. Kaya nga the wages situation.
Yes. Well, this is where education nga and information kick in.
Yeah.
So if we now educate people, that's why what we're doing, Doc, is we're in the education business.
Yep.
We're putting this in the public so that we realize we have choices, we have options. And remember, we were there first, right? We just let ourselves go. We can be back in the game again. We
Yep.
just say, okay, for this next round, what we will say is yung alignment issue eh. We really need to Ako naman, I'm not so concerned about the corporate use of AI because, when they use an LLM, they will use their own private data, di ba? Less bullshit with private data. Ang
Yeah.
ginawa kasi ng ChatGPT was just the internet. Purely uncurated, without consent, pinasok lang doon. And, the deep learning did the rest of it. That's deeply problematic kasi nga yung nilalabas niya is not really truthful.
Yeah.
Sa corporate they have basic, but we still have to address, no, kasi nasabi na natin ethics is key. So therefore yung mga systems natin, we really just have to not misrepresent them. I remember I was just looking at this when ChatGPT was just new, lumabas itong kay this guy si Alexander Tulkanov. And basically I agree with what he's saying. If you're looking at ChatGPT, sabi lang niya, you know, does it matter if the output is true? If no, it's safe to use ChatGPT. In other words, use it as a sounding board, use it as a creative tool, use it as something to improve your prose. But if truth is important, you swing to the right side. If yes, do you have the expertise to verify that the output is accurate? If no, don't use it. Simple as that, no? If yes, are you able and willing to take full responsibility for any inaccuracies? Or if no, don't use it. If
So
yes,
this can form I like
mm,
the line of questioning. This can form part of that. You remember that impact assessment we were contemplating?
yes, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
So
So
yung ganitong
ito,
questionnaire, is that something that's best emanating from the government or no? Or
well, I think definitely this is part of professionalizing AI, which
yeah,
is saying that do not overpromise, declare what it can do.
yeah.
Now,
Transparency.
government has to enforce. Kasi if you remember the case of tobacco, di ba? The tobacco industry naman knew it was, cancer-inducing, knew it was addictive, but they were hiding it until government said no more hiding. We know it is addictive, so you have to declare it in the packaging. And then when that wasn't enough, government said you have to put pictures to really tell people. Kasi if you say maybe hazardous to your health, what is hazardous? A teenager thinks he's Superman, he's invulnerable, he's chugging away, he's 17 years old and he's a chain smoker. You put a picture there. Even here in Asia, the Philippines was the last one to implement the picture warnings because of the lobby of the tobacco companies. And even now, Philip Morris already announced last week they're turning away from cigarettes. They're already transforming themselves into a smoke-free company within the next years. So ito, natuwa lang ako dito kasi as early as January 19, 2023, it was already made very clear. Now, it would have been nice if this flowchart appears when you use ChatGPT.
Yeah.
For me, that's the
Assuming
professional
assuming
thing to do.
OpenAI can be compelled to
Well,
provide safety to their product.
assuming their engineers studied human-centered AI and
Ah,
ethical professional values, they would have said to put it themselves. They
yeah,
would have put it themselves. But government takes about 1.5 years to make the law and another 1.5 years for the grace period, di ba? Kaya total of 3 years yan eh. But my God, in 3 years, ChatGPT 22 na siguro eh. So the point here is we're talking ethics. Ethics is something that we in a community agree is the right thing to do. And then we, through institutions, education, media, educate the people and say, oh, did you check this already? So students will be told, oh, are you using ChatGPT? You better tell me, and then you better verify it yourself. Ganyan. So that's part of it. Kasi government naman cannot, government is slow by design eh. Very slow by design. Sa atin, di ba, may 3 levels of reading. First reading, second reading, third reading. Tapos meron pang joint version. Di ba? I-debate pa yung joint version, may interpolation pa yon. Tapos ifa-fund pa.
yeah.
Tapos may grace period pa. May IRR, tapos may grace period pa. Di ang tagal-tagal. For example, yung sustainability report ng publicly listed corporations, it was mandated by the SEC 2019. It only kicks in now, 2023. Which means we will only see the report March 2024. Doon pa lang natin malalaman, Doc, kasi one of the requirements there is itong compensation. The publicly listed corporations have to declare in that report what is the ratio of their pay relative to each other. Papakita nila doon. So
Yep.
we will now see why there tends to be such unequal compensation within corporations. But if you go to PSE Edge, you can download naman from any company, and you can see the compensation of the top executives. So
Yep.
for example, you can see now it's anywhere from 10, 15, 20 million a month. Now these are companies that still to some extent pay minimum wage at the lowest levels. So ang point natin is baka naman if you're paying minimum wage and then the top executives are earning 10 to 15 million a month, baka naman they can do some profit sharing, right?
Yeah.
On a good year, they
Pero
can.
pero that goes back to that structural issue na
Mm,
or that value extractive issue. It's not
yes.
a common practice. Like let's say and I'm not saying they're thinking of this. I'm a CEO of a major conglomerate.
Yes,
It
yes.
doesn't bother me that the lowest common denominator in my company gets paid, I don't know, the equivalent of my expensive socks while I live kind of a plush lifestyle. In fact, I might even deserve it or think I deserve it now. Okay. I'm CEO of so and so corporation. I definitely deserve a plush
Well,
lifestyle.
that's where I take a different view. I think going back to our cultural roots, I think deep down we're a caring people. We are. It's just that this data, that's why analytics is so important. The data is not shown, right? For example, if you're in the front row of a buffet,
Uh-huh.
but you don't know that everybody else in the back is hungry, of course you'll enjoy your food, right?
So
But
so there's an ignorance factor you're saying.
yes,
Maybe they're not
yes.
aware lang.
They're
Okay.
not, katulad niyan, nung pinakita ko sa iyo yung mga graphs, di ba? You appreciated it.
Yeah.
Because you did not know it was that bad,
Yeah.
right? But this is available because the poverty database of the World Bank is free for everyone to use. Everybody has a smartphone, you can search that. This is the thing, but education and critical thinking is the kicker. It's
Yeah.
not just the technology. People have to, which is my greatest fear dito sa consumer use of LLMs.
Yep.
The critical thinking is at risk. Kailangan we have that curiosity to pursue a question. Why is it like this? Which is
Mm.
what we're doing now, diba? And then you look at the data and you say, oh, it might be here, it might be there. And then open a dialogue with people and say, oh, did you know about this? And then people will now say, oh, nga, no? Then that will now generate interest and action. So social action is essentially what gives rise to NGOs, di ba? All NGOs are cause-oriented. That's why I tell my students, you spend a lot of time in Facebook and IG, spend more time in LinkedIn. Kasi sa LinkedIn, you can pursue causes, gain expertise, and build networks and build coalitions for specific things that can benefit the country and your community. And you can also build your profile and your portfolio there, right? So yun ang nagiging challenge natin ngayon. How do we mitigate the risks?
Mm. Mm.
Because government, and this is the alignment issue, di ba? Sabi natin, we want to make sure it produces human development. That's a key.
Yep.
Kaya maganda yung sinabi mo yun sa Uber kasi basic material need yun to go from point A to point B So that's a terrific use of AI. Tama? Kaya lang, syempre, if it will be at the expense of the drivers, and this is an issue naman everywhere with ride sharing, di ba? Nagrereklamo naman talaga yung mga drivers minsan. Which is the same with all platform types of business models. Spotify, a lot of artists complain about how Spotify works, di ba? Pero government is key dito sa safety side kasi because government has to say na this has to be approved because we need to assure our kasi yun na di ba? Kunyari, you were riding an Uber. Let's say your daughter was riding an Uber and then she got harassed by an Uber driver. The parents will of course complain to government, right? And so when government says, oh, we don't have a system for really monitoring these things, so doon lalabas yung weakness ng system. Ganon din ang AI. I think, and some AI leaders have CVC, Mitchell is one. This has to be regulated the same way we regulate bioengineering. Because in effect it is bioengineering you're creating life so whether it's a pharmaceutical product or a bacteria or a virus di ba? Once you create it will have impacts it will have impacts and it multiplies and it transmits. Oh. So, kailangan yan may registry. And then, when you click on the registry, let's say may serial number siya, just like a serial number of a product, di ba? Makikita mo yung progeny niya, saan siya nagsimula, anong year siya unang tinest, di ba? So, sa pharma kasi ganyan eh, merong clinical trials, di ba? Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, matatrace mo. Ito lang na itong COVID, syempre, hindi dumaan sa phase 3 yung mga yan. Diba? Kasi emergency use, ano yan, approval. Pero all drugs that we use, normally, may ganun. So, dapat ganyan din to. Kasi ngayon, pag tinanong mo, tell us the whole corpus of data that was used. Minsan it's said, minsan it's not eh. In the article nga
And
for
they're being
GPT-4,
sued. OpenAI is being sued now by
yeah, already,
all sorts of
already,
authors saying that we didn't authorize
already.
you to put it in the blah blah.
Yeah, yeah, which makes sense. Which makes sense. That's why I was half teasing when I said, should I sue? Because I'm being introduced with all the wrong universities. Siguro I'm not motivated to sue because the universities are very prestigious, maybe. Maybe it's feeding my ego, no? So, but the problem is, it's still not true. So, kailangan naka-declare doon na if your job requires truthful knowledge, do not use this because then it's harm.
Mm-hmm.
Kaya nga yung ISO 31000, ang linaw-linaw naman ng mga risk management standards eh. For example, ISO 31000 is a popular one, ano?
Yeah, I
Ang
like
sinas
31K. I used to take that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
O, di ba ang sinasabi, if you identify the risks, then you have to specify the treatment of the risks.
correct.
And you have 7 ways to treat it. You avoid the risk by deciding
Transfer. Yeah,
not to start. Well, transfer
tolerate.
is, way down.
Yeah,
Although we do the
terminate.
transfer. We do the transfer kapag katulad noon, i-introduce ako, mali yung ano ko, sabihin, in-approve naman ni Ben, sabi niya, introduce ko.
So you transfer the liability somewhere else.
Sa akin, naka-transfer. But for me, the most important is number one, avoid the risk by
Yeah,
deciding not to start.
completely. Yeah, exactly.
Which is actually what the guys who signed the letter for APOS is saying. Pwede ba, wag nyo na i-develop muna ng GPT-5 kasi nga, we need to get our mind around how to do this system of testing, then documenting the progeny so we can trace if something happens. Diba? Ganyan naman, the way the government regulates plutonium, all this fissionable material, lahat yan, tinatrack eh. Yung movements niyan is in an international database. Otherwise, you could have dirty bombs in every city, right? But
Yeah,
every ounce of plutonium is tracked. Eh dito, wala. Hindi ka naglagay ng mga ng mga
guardrails.
Oo, well, tsaka yung identifiers and tracers, di ba? Lumabas na lang ngayon yung mga bago, what do they call it? Watermarking, right? That means pagka may nilabas na output ang ChatGPT, you have a watermarking, parang sa pera, pag inano mo ng infrared, di ba, lumalabas yung kulay. They're doing that now with LLM outputs. But guess what? Somebody invented the thing that will erase the watermark. So, ganyan talaga eh. Kaya dapat at the source talaga, i-ano mo na is there a risk? And then remove the risk source. So for example, sa tingin ko, curating the data for LLM is essential. Pero hindi ganun ang sistema, di ba? Walang curating sa data kasi it's so inefficient to curate data.
Yeah, tsaka they I don't know, rightfully or wrongfully, they want to prove that with the least amount of human intervention, intelligence is created.
Yeah, it does create intelligent-like behavior, di ba?
Oh,
And that's the emphasis, intelligent-like. And then they fix it at the tail end by having human reinforcement learning. So sa akin, we're back to that system again. Na you have a bad process and then you try to fix it at the end. But di ba we learn in quality na doing something right, you have to do it right the first time.
yeah.
Kasi if you produce something and then you just tell the quality assurance people, can you fix this at the end? That's wasteful. And it's dangerous. It's
Yeah.
dangerous. Di ba? Kaya nga dun sa building ng Citicorp, tinanong ko kasi yung isang engineer, how could that happen? Kasi nung nag-simulate sila, mali yung data na ipasok nila dun sa simulation. So it happens. Right? So, kaya nung pina-review nung kaya yun, I tell my graduate students, yan ang ano ngayon eh, parang the analytic soldiers eh. Give them assignments that really will analyze what's going on in the world. So mga computer scientists, sige, i-break apart niyo yung mga AI systems niyan, from the data source pa lang, di ba? You explained that before, yung the different parts of system development and where all the problems can fit in. Ganyan talaga yan, titignan mo. And always it starts with the data. Always starts with the
Yeah,
data.
AI ethics starts with data ethics.
Yes,
And
exactly. Oh, that's what you've been saying the whole time. And I
no.
don't think you should stop saying that because
Actually, may next level
oh,
pa, which we talk
mm,
about. The data
mm,
ethics starts with business ethics, the process.
mm,
Kasi if you have a bad process, bad data.
yeah,
Kaya nga,
yeah,
pero you
yeah,
know, I have not met, I don't know, I might be exaggerating. I have not met a data person, data scientist, data engineer, data anything, who's even willing to go down that level. There's
yeah,
this weird, parang ano eh, Chinese wall or something na, okay, as far as the data is concerned, yan na yung aking ano, truth. And I'm worried na that's actually a bit short-sighted because if clearly the data is flawed, it was a product of a flawed process, whatever it was, flawed data gathering,
yeah, yeah.
flawed, I don't know, whatever. You should have a say in it. Pero yun din, we're back to this structural problem, microcosm in a company. You will rarely have a data officer who has a say in business process. That's why digital transformation as a concept, which I actually want to talk about in a webinar, is usually doomed from the start. Eh. There's a very high failure rate in digital transformation. Kasi nga, parang masyadong firewall yung digital component, the data, the analytics, the automation, from the rest of the organization. That's why there were attempts before, like, remember the Six Sigma phenomenon?
Yes, that's right.
That
That's
was
right.
also kind of a failure, if you ask me, kasi parang firewall mo na naman yung mga black belt mo with all their statistical knowledge. They can't naman control the business process. The best they can do is measure it.
Well, what they can do, what I think they can do, is really come up with collaboration with the risk officers. Kasi
Risk
all the big
management.
companies have risk
Yeah.
and officers, right? So, for example, well, ako, I always,
Actually, risk coming, because I spent a a
yes.
better part of my career in
Mm,
risk. Eh.
mm,
I think
mm.
risk comes close kasi you're kind of in between. You're between the business process and audit. No, you're in the middle. No, ang problema naman sa risk from experience then, being risk-minded doesn't mean data-minded. Although you would argue they're supposed to go together, right? There are, like for example, in a bank, mga market risk people, credit risk people, by default, they have data, right? Kasi borrowers, markets. Pero the op risk people who actually have a wider mandate, kasi they touch everything, you rarely have these data-driven initiatives to stop everything from theft to fraud. Maybe fraud to a certain extent has data. But what about other things like workplace safety, things like that, or diba?
Oo.
I mean, those are all operational risks. Pero who counts these things, diba? Yun yung usually yung weakness.
Well, eto na
Ironic.
nga. In the case of LLMs, the data is huge.
Yeah.
The point is the risk that is embedded in the data. Kaya dapat the data scientist has to educate the risk officer that because of the tainted data, what can happen is, yun na nga, false claims, unfair treatment, ganon. So, syempre, hindi naman maiintindihan kaagad ng risk officer yon until they have a legal suit in their hands or they have somebody run over by an autonomous car. So, ang point natin is, kailangan alam nila yon. So, what do we do? If this is the risk, what do we do? Do we do this at all or not? That's what I'm advocating that the board of directors should know. They should give the go or no go for certain things. Kasi ngayon, because of the absence of regulation, for all we know, deployed na yung AI sa mga loan approvals. Nobody's just saying anything, right? Kasi manager pa rin naman na nakapirma. Certainly, in the hiring, you have 500 applicants, yung mga resumes, dinadaan na rin sa AI. Paano kung may mga bias lahat yan? Puro Lasal, puro mga Ateneo, ganyan-ganyan. Unconstitutional yan eh. I keep telling itong mga interns ko, kasi they work in many of the top companies in the HR offices, minsan sinasabihan talaga sila, pagka mga itong skills nito, lagay nyo na lang sa ibabaw yan. Sabi ko, hindi dapat ganoon. Dapat competency based. Ano yung hinahanap natin, i-rank natin yan according to the competence, di ba? Pagka mga groups, yan nga ang tinatawag na bias.
Yeah,
Di ba?
true.
O,
Yeah, I
ang,
also think it's a failure of ano eh, heuristics, you know what I mean? Parang we
Mhm.
have all of these logical shortcuts. I'm not saying they're all correct. They're probably not all correct, but they exist because it helps decision making, right? Kaya
It does.
so favoritism is a heuristic.
Uh,
Kung
it
kilala
is.
kita, you're probably
Mm-mm.
good. It's probably not true, but I know
Yeah.
you. Nepotism's another heuristic.
Oh,
So
kasi we have cognitive limitations. We use heuristics all the time.
yeah,
We
yeah.
just want to make sure that it doesn't lead us down a path which is patently unfair, di ba?
Yeah.
Kasi
And then
that
in the face of evidence, dapat you should be willing
yes.
to change your
Yes,
heuristic, di ba?
yes, tama,
Yun na eh.
tama. Tsaka, pag heuristics kasi, well, if it's something as important as whether it will give a job to one or to Juana,
Yeah,
medyo hindi pwedeng heuristics lang yan. Kasi
correct.
kabuhayan yan eh, di ba?
Hmm.
O
Yeah.
pag sinabi mong, hindi ko gusto yung accent niya kasi medyo matigas eh. O from the north yan, or medyo Bisaya from the south. Eh, alam naman natin may bias talaga mga Metro Manila eh, di ba? Kaya nga ganito tayo, we cannot have a nation building because we're so regional because the biases are so embedded. So
Correct.
how do you build a nation when somebody's view of how proper speaking is imposed on everybody else, which
Yeah.
is crazy, right?
Wait, I have a question now. Kasi total
Mm,
we're on the topic of nation
mm,
building, right?
mm.
And again, I don't know the formula. I only can see more recent examples of complete turnarounds. Like Korea was an interesting turnaround. Singapore also. These places were decrepit outposts back in the 19th
Yeah,
century, and then now
yeah,
they're galing, no? Where does it start? I mean, sometimes history is very poetic. It starts with a crisis, siguro. Like the World War One and Two was always a convenient
yeah, yeah.
parang pivot for many countries. Pero
Yes.
parang tayo, yung pivot natin pabalik eh. So
Oh,
so how do we engineer some kind of national renewal whilst keeping these economic and technological forces? I mean, I don't know if you can keep them at bay. They're really there. Pero
well,
somehow we have to spark that parang
yeah.
renewal.
This is one of the most sensitive discussions. Kasi in all of the reforms that we mentioned, all of those involve, let's face it, they involve really bloody revolutions.
Yeah. Or
And
effectively a revolution, if not
yeah,
yeah, a real
uh,
one or maybe, parang grabe.
yeah, and of course during the 70s, all the ASEAN countries had dictatorships, ours included, right? But if you compare two dictators like a Marcos and a Lee Kuan Yew, they had central authority. They threw so many people to jail for so-called communist links. Uh, But if you look at the way the society grew, that would be your measure. So the answer is it always has to start with governance. But do you need a bloody crisis? As I said, we don't have the stomach for it. I would rather we have a crisis by showing data. You
Yeah.
tell people, look at that. Will you look at that? Kasi we're in denial because nobody talks about the data. That's why I think kayo, AAP, tayo, we play such an important role eh.
Mhm.
Kasi nga, because we are a non-confrontational culture, we don't like talking about it to sound like we're blaming anyone. And
Yeah.
I don't want that either. That's why I say, let's look at the data. These are third-party data, right? Of course,
Yeah.
some of the PSA data is there, but you juxtapose it with FIES, World Bank, etc. Makikita mo naman eh, ang in-announce na goal ng you download the Philippine Development Plan, by 2028, poverty will go down to 9%. O then let's monitor that.
Yeah.
Oh, tingnan na lang natin. Let's treat it as a project and say, oh, all hands on deck, all minds on deck. This is what we need. My question is this: what level of productivity do we need to grow the economy so that everybody who is working gets at least the living wage, right? And everybody else above the living wage gets what is proportionate to their productivity. You can do some number crunching. You can ask any economist. They will compute that for you. No? And then you ask yourself, so how many new businesses do we need to generate? And therefore, what kind of platform do we need so that fintech and good AI is available to everyone so that even a sari-sari store owner can use LLMs to say, oh, I have a good delivery of of confection in my sari-sari store. Maybe I can print a promo ad, no, na very creative, targeted at my audience, di ba?
Yeah.
Na it's like she has her own advertising firm and she can make it in her computer and put it there, di ba? O mga ate, mga kuya, alam niyo ba, may discount ngayon, ang ganyan-ganyan. Kaya-kaya ng LLM yun eh. O, ganun ba? Yung parang yung Nordstrom idea ko na everybody now becomes a total package because you're achieving more using information. You're achieving more because you're giving more value to your customers. So they will come. They
Yeah.
will buy, right? And then everybody's income will grow, and then we will build the middle class that we
So I
deserve.
get I get the
Mm,
sort of the utopian vision, no?
yes.
Now the syempre my gut feel is we need to argue for parang short circuiting some things in the system. And parang intuitively, I think AI could be one of those things that short circuit. Kasi number one, let's just face it, maybe sometimes ignorance is also an opportunity. People are unaware of how this thing could actually parang leapfrog or short circuit a lot of the
Yeah, yeah.
structural parang 'di ba
Definitely.
impediments. So
Yeah.
so
Oo.
I'm now concerned about how do we get ahead of the natural inertia of Philippine society to drag everything down by getting a first mover parang instinct on this AI thing and democratize it as quickly as possible. And then who knows, no, the whole system just reboots. I don't know, it's medyo romantic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm just like you. I'm a romantic. The first is, of course, safety first. No? That's why we have to say, make this safe. So
Uh-huh.
if you just use it for creative use, then market it as such. This is a way for you to uh, generate ideas.
Yeah.
You can have a conversation with it. It's generating ideas with you. It's like you have a consulting firm, everything, as long as it doesn't have to be factual. You provide facts, right? And then let's spread it through social media use cases. Mabilis naman yan nangyari nung pandemic. Nung pandemic, I was really amazed at all of these manangs. They were trapped in their homes, and then they studied how to make small figurines with clay using YouTube lessons, ganyan, ganyan. And then they started selling it to their friends, and then they were making so much money. One of them said she formed an ML multi-level marketing group. She trained 200 other manangs at homes who were
Uh-huh.
not doing anything, and they're now all selling over YouTube. My God, they sell like professionals, di ba?
And then the MLM
Oh,
aspect there was more for recruitment, I'm assuming, no? Kasi that also has its own moral
yeah.
hazards, no?
Well, we differentiate MLMs from pyramids, di ba? So, ang importante sa MLMs is that the product is moving.
Yep, correct.
Whereas in
Not just
pyramids,
about the incentives, no?
yeah, if it's pyramids, it's really the incentives based on recruitment that's moving. Madali naman yan eh. You can compute it.
Oh,
In a legitimate MLM, 80 to 90% of actual revenue moving must be actual products moving.
para may
In a
value. There's value in the
Yes, that
system.
you're creating value, di ba? In pyramids, actually, yung mga nasa taas lang ang yan ang talagang extractive, di ba? Yung mga nakauna, they sell the dream downstairs, pero talagang sila lang yung kumikita.
Yep.
If you think about it, I mean, this is a bit uncharitable, but our economy, our social structure is a pyramid,
Yeah, it
di
is.
ba?
It's
Yeah,
kaya nga value extractive eh. Parang,
yeah, you have the top extracting and making false promises to people that you work harder, you will move up. The
yeah.
middle class na is not growing, so where is the moving up? Oh,
Actually, ang nangyari,
oh,
on a more whatever macro level, because of government borrowings, we are fundamentally a Ponzi scheme na. Kasi we have borrowed presumably growth from future generations who have to pay for it,
yeah, yeah.
and the numbers are getting wilder and wilder. Like
Well,
we're throwing away trillions na right and left, no? Yun yung nakakainis
this
dyan.
is it nga. Kasi nga, you're borrowing on the promise that your people can deliver, right? That's why we need to produce the productivity. It's not a Ponzi if people can actually deliver. Kasi
Mm.
false promise ang Ponzi, di ba? You just
Yeah.
get from one to give to Maria. There's no value moving actually. But I think we are value creators. Filipinos are value creators. We do it well. We're respected anywhere in the world. The problem is because of the structural problem in our country, we're not able to harness that productivity innovation gene entrepreneurial gene of the Filipino to produce a common good kind of buffet setting. We're locked into this extractive, trickle up model. That's why with data, that's why I'm very excited by the sustainability reports. Eh. Pag
Yeah.
lumabas na yung mga sustainability reports, then there will be a reckoning. Sasabihin na ng mga public, well, I hope, no, this is the theory of the SEC kasi, uh, that when the sustainability reports come out, and then people can now see, oh, company X pala is doing this for communities, for its employees, for the environment, and then company Y is doing this. Oh, why don't we get more people working for company X? And then why don't we remind company Y, oh, let's do the right thing. Kasi nangyari na sa Amerika yan. When 2 years ago, they reported the ratio of the CEO to the median income of one company, it was 1,700 to 1. Okay, I'm trying to remember. It's a shoe company. Eh. The public backlash was so strong. It was almost as strong as the old boycotts during you remember the original sweatshop boycotts ng Nike and everything.
Oh,
Di
yeah.
ba? Binoycott yun. Parang ganon.
That was massive.
Massive. And in fact, this approximated that, no? Kasi 1,700, parang hindi nila maano. How can you say that the CEO produces 1,700 the value produced by a median employee? What kind of insane proposition is that? Nag-pushback sila, right?
Pero yun,
When,
ano na yun? I
oh,
think that's corporate governance, no? Moral hazard.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
Kasi nga, you asked me where it begins eh. For me, governance is always where it begins eh. So ito rin, ito rin AI. Sure that the technology people engineer it, the uh, the the, the functional areas, you know, recommend to purchase it, but ultimately it's the board that approves it eh.
Yeah.
Ang point ko is that the board should know how its functional areas are deploying AI. You cannot say that's too technical. They tried that defense before, remember, with derivatives, etc. in the late 90s, early 2000s. In the US nga, yung mga Orange County, yung mga ganyan, na bankrupt kasi yung mga treasurer nila invested in derivatives. After that, the law said, if you're going to approve any derivative, you have to say as a CEO, I understand this, I'm willingly and knowingly approving this. You cannot say, the CFO made me do it. O ngayon naman, anong mangyayari? The CTO made me do it. The Chief Technology Officer made me do it. That's silly. If you're the board, you should know why it's being done.
Exactly.
Oh, and then the board should ask for a full briefing from the risk officers and say, okay, we understand the value proposition. How are we on risk? Nasabihin ngayon ng risk officer yan, o ito yung mga risks niyan eh. O kasi minsan it hallucinates, o minsan it has shown bias for certain groups. O this is what we do to mitigate that. No? So we openly declare or we have a hotline if you have a question. If your loan was disapproved and you want a full explanation of why, or we have an appointment, we set it with you, explain. Kasi dito po kulang tayo, di ba? Hindi naman. So they have a system in place. Kasi there will be litigation, of course, right? Although sa US kasi, very litigious, di ba? You have those small law firms that will support class suits. Eh. Sa Pilipinas kasi, ang hirap mag-class suit kasi all of the
Mahal.
Campanilla law firms, yeah, who can afford it? Oh, tsaka pagka yung corporation na sinumo, de Campanilla yung law firm yan eh. Pinax pa lang yung case sa'yo, nanginginig ka na, di ba?
Yeah.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
yung nginig factor. Sa Amerika, walang ganun. The small lawyers, babanggain yung pinakamalalaking companies doon. Kasi ano sila eh, they're also entrepreneurial, the lawyers. Dito, talagang ano yan, you already cornered the big names, the firms and all of these big names. So, but you're always hoping that in the cold light of day, with everybody looking at a situation, you increase the chances that there will be a fair outcome. But why wait for litigation? Ang tagal yan eh, up to 15 years yan to the Supreme Court eh. The goal is to avoid the risk before you bring it out the door. O, sabihan mo na kaagad yung mga tao na, okay, we're only using this AI for these certified purposes, and we are definitely announcing to the public that we are not using it for the following purposes. Transparency.
Actually, that's a good life
Oh,
hack to attack it from a risk-based
I
standpoint.
believe so. I believe so. Kasi
Kasi
nandyan na yung framework na yan eh.
Kasi if you go the tech route, daming
Hmm.
magulo. And then if you go the business route, syempre medyo several levels pa before they absorb na, okay, it's a big deal. But if you go the risk route, kasi that goes up and down, up to the board, down to
Yeah.
the user, and it's a mandated requirement by corporate governance to have a risk management committee, for example.
Yes. The
Then yun
structure is
dapat ang
there.
structure. Dun
Yeah.
dapat ang structure. Yeah.
The structure is there, but we have to create that dialogue block. We need
Aha.
to have the AI, data scientists, and the tech people talking to the risk people so that they can deliver a joint presentation to the governance and say,
Here's the challenge, or hindi
uh,
naman challenge,
uh,
here's the
mm,
opportunity. In some industries, I would say banking, for example, manufacturing, the risk culture is quite mature. There is a chief risk officer. Pero in other
mhm.
industries, pansin ko, it's alien eh. It's either an operations officer or sometimes risk is tucked under finance. So crystallizing the role of a risk officer
Yeah,
parang
yeah,
is a needed requirement. In fact,
yeah, yeah.
audit pa nga kind of
Oo,
exists half of the time pa lang eh.
tama, tama,
Pero
oo,
yung
that's
risk,
true.
may nakatago eh. So, that's a good step to recommend. We need a risk officer.
Yeah,
Tapos, there's also this privacy officer who's also kind of a half and half
yes,
compliance and risk management din yun eh. Baka
yes.
dun dapat i-crystallize yun kasi then it's more, there's
Yeah,
really
well,
line office for it, no? Parang
yeah,
ganun.
I think I'm glad you mentioned the data privacy kasi parang ganyan din naman ang naging genesis, no, di ba? When the general data privacy law was passed, it mandated nga the appointment of data privacy officers.
Yeah.
So I think similarly, kasi ito na nangyayari sa EU eh, there will be AI officers approved eh. Magkakaroon talaga yan.
Mm.
Ngayon, baka nga we can roll it into the role of some of these existing officers kasi ang dami-dami ng officers eh. I remember my joke eh, nung lumabas na yung mga risk officers, sabi ko, it's like you were given a license to drive and then every time there's a yellow light, there's somebody beside you who has to tell you, excuse me driver, it's yellow. And then you have to slow down. In the old days, the driver thought of everything himself, right? Ngayon, you need officers telling the manager, oh,
Kung
sabi ko,
malala dati, yellow means speed up.
oh, well, in the Philippines, that's what it means, right? Kaya nga may risk officer. Kasi nga sa Philippines, a law is a suggestion and a yellow is a speed up. So, yun ang sinasabi nila. Pero it's becoming ridiculous kasi for every new risk, you create new officers, right? Eh ako, since
Which is
this
hard. It's not sustainable. You keep doing it.
yeah, and it doesn't work kasi nga the manager gets overwhelmed with so, di ba, pag nagda-drive ka tam ingay-ingay ng mga backseat drivers, sabihin mo, di kayo na mag-drive, di ba nakakainis?
Kasi look
Kaya,
there's already
oh,
privacy. Then there's
mm,
security, yung mga CISO
yes, that's
already,
right.
right? Then you have the compliance officer,
Compliance officers,
you have the
yes,
audit officer. Talagang ano
yes.
eh, parang it
Oh,
multiplies eh by
it
parang
multiplies. It multiplies. Kaya nga sa akin, the risk management framework does not necessarily sit with a distinct person, but it is a mindset.
the
You're
shared
saying,
responsibility.
oh, it's a mindset eh. Every time you release a product, every time you release a service to the world, you're really saying that, it will impact on stakeholders eh. That's why you're saying, what am I rolling out to the world? What are the risks? And then
Yeah.
I say, okay, either I don't do it para walang risk, or I release it but I tell everybody this is what the risk will be. Are you saying yes to this? Ganun lang naman yun eh, di ba?
Para there's
Oh,
accountability eventually.
exactly.
Assuming
Exactly.
assuming the enterprise survives the blow up na yun
Well,
ang yung
the,
challenge eh.
the point is in the rollout, kaya nga may test markets, di ba? In some cases, for example, now they're test marketing this new beer from Cebu. Medyo premium ang pricing niya, parang artisanal, di ba? Pero they're doing test markets of it kasi i-roll out nila sa Metro Manila. Sabi ko, that's good. That's how it should be. That's the prudent way to do these things. No? Pero, to have an untested thing from 0 to 100 million users in 2 months, that was too much too soon.
Yeah.
In my view, dapat yun talaga parang sandbox approach eh. Tapos, ginawa mo, ito, you're all registered as beta test. Kasi I'm a gamer, no? So I do beta testing of games when it's gonna roll out. Pero meron kami mga registration, tapos may Discord, kami, as we talk about it, ganyan. Hindi naman ganyan ang nangyari dyan eh.
Yeah.
Biro mo, I'm being introduced as an Oxford graduate. Oh, how ridiculous is that, di ba? So, ang point lang is how to roll it back, learn from it, and then move forward again. This time, safe, Pero this time also focus on value. And there are no false claims. Ang value niya talaga sa tingin ko is it plays with language in ways that combines previously uncombined. Para siyang kaleidoscope. When you're looking at a kaleidoscope, di ba? You see all sorts of new color combinations that you didn't see before. So nakaka-stimulate talaga siya, di ba? Kaya lang when you start believing it to be true, that's where the danger comes in.
Yep.
That's where all the risks come in. So I think I wasn't surprised when the EU Act identified education and information as high risk use.
Tama.
In fact, una sabi ko medyo extreme naman yun. Parang bakit high risk use? Kasi pag high risk use, yung highest level of risk management yung makikick in eh. Kasi they have 4 levels of risk dun sa AI Act eh.
Baga, parang DEFCON 5 ang labas, ano? Parang
In effect, oo, ganon. But I realize kasi if a student is using it, biruin mo yun, he's very knowledge of something. Whereas before, he was learning from a textbook with a clear author, with sources cited, etc., etc. Pag tinanong siya ng boss niya, saan ko natutunan yan? I
Aha.
went to Lasal. Ano ba textbook niyo dyan? Ito pag sinabi mo talaga ng ChatGPT, wala naman talaga siyang sources eh. Di
Wala.
ba? Oo. And then, ayaw naman nila i-declare yung corpus. And the corpus itself, we know, some of those are public corpuses naman. Everything is inside there. That's like the sewer with the food, kasama lahat yun eh. Oo. So we need to have better curation standards, di ba? If they're going to use human feedback, we need to see the credentials of all the human nannies.
Yeah, correct.
Wala, hindi nila sinasabi yan. In fact, OpenAI, nung nalaman ng mga tao na they were using underpaid Kenyan workers, I'm sure some of them did it here. Eh. Di ba? Nag-ano rin tayo dito,
Exactly.
nag-outsource tayo ng content moderation dito. Pero nung nasisilip na nga yung sweldo, they cut the contract na. So who is doing it now? It's an open question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dapat yan lahat transparent. Di ba? Kasi dyan mo malalaman. And then you can say na, oh, I'm gonna go give this 2 out of 4 stars in credibility kasi yung mga human nannies are from here, ito yung profile nila. Diba? Yun naman ang question, di ba? If you have the expertise, are you willing to accept the responsibility? It's like if you are getting a nanny, you're leaving your child with this nanny, you will be responsible.
Yep.
Kasi decision mo yun eh. No? And the key here now is once that risk thing is done, I have to keep pushing back na innovation is the key. We now want I was so inspired by this guy who used ChatGPT to have fresh pizza recipes every week.
I
You know,
saw that then. Oo nga.
grabe, sabi ko, that's something. Of course,
Nga, yun na nga. I
oh,
think there's still a margin of
mm,
quote unquote safety before things get abusive. But right now we have a culture that doesn't even want to maximize that. So, for example, just using ChatGPT doesn't automatically make it wrong. But there
yeah,
will
for
be
creative, yeah, it's
yeah,
not
there are
wrong.
limits, diba?
Oh,
So
yeah,
within that
oh,
limited,
yeah.
albeit space, hindi rin tayo ganun ka-adventurous. So that's the opportunity to educate people na, hey, look, kaya nyo to, ganyan. Without jumping to the doomsday scenarios,
Oo nga.
which will be addressed by the safety discussion.
Oo, dito lang naman kasi yun eh, di ba? If it doesn't matter if it's true or not, we're all safe. Right? I mean, what is a true pizza anyway? That's an artistic creation. Of course, unless it's asking you to put poison in it, right? So, ang aanuhin mo lang naman dyan, these are new juxtapositions of things.
Hindi,
Oh,
ang modification ko nga dyan, but I don't know how precise it can be. If it's a proper noun, like a Ben Teehankee, talagang yon off limits. Kasi it will definitely hallucinate. But if it's like a common enough, not necessarily a common noun, but kind of short of a name, there's still a lot of opportunity. Like you can talk about risk management. I mean, it will probably not lie about risk management.
yeah. Well, it's not a monolithic field, as you know, di ba? Kasi the risk frameworks don't even agree with each other. It depends on which
Yeah.
one you're using eh. So it will get the mean of all of those eh,
Oh
di
yeah,
ba?
that's kind of the middle.
Yun ang gagawin niya eh. Kasi nga it's a JPEG image, di ba? So ang nagtaka lang ako dito kay Tilka, no? Sabi niya, possible to use ChatGPT, but be sure to verify. So, ginawa na lang niyang asterisk. Kung ako yan, lalagay ko yan in big bold sa loob.
Correct.
Di ba? Sure, if there are
Or
nouns there,
use
oh,
a qualified use of ChatGPT, parang ganon. You have to
yeah,
qualify it.
that's exactly what it is. That's
Oh,
what Tulkanov is saying. Hindi naman niya sinabing don't use it. But be very careful that you're not making the wrong assumptions about it because it's not designed to be factual.
tama.
Especially with the data. From the get-go, as you said, yung data ng pinasok, uncurated. So how can you get something out of that? Diba?
Yeah,
Garbage in, garbage out. So what you will get is the average talk, the average discourse on these things. But how value creating is that pagka knowledge ang basis natin?
tama.
It's not For me, if it's for research, knowledge creation, it's not really value creating. But if it's for creative, hypothesis building, and ideation, di ba, sa design thinking, may ideation, di ba? Mag-iisip ka talaga, oh, what if we do this? What if we do that? Perfect. And then you go through the rigor na of actually testing it. Oh. Then imagine if we have a country of entrepreneurs who are ideating furiously so that we can bring the rest of our population up. Di ba? Ang daming kailangan tulungan na umangat. Therefore, we need to create so much value. We talked about taxes earlier. In transport, there is so much that we need to do. Then we talked about food security. There is so much we need to do to make agriculture productive. Storage, so we need to ideate, think of better ways to store, to transport, to experiment, things like that. Tapos with fintech, people are now more participating in the transfer of value from here to there. In other words, we're rebooting business using
Within kind
a
of this weak
yes,
infrastructure of regulation and government, somehow.
The government kasi is the referee, di ba? If you have a basketball game, they should not be in the court, they're on the side. Ang point nga natin is, but they have to be competent. Kasi kung aanga-anga sila, talagang there will be blood in the court, di ba? Pero kung ano naman sila, paalam sila, pumipito sila at the right time, then the players will bring up their best and then we will really have a
There's
wonderful
actually
game.
one. I mean, since we're already at the hour and a half mark, no. I wanted to ask you about parang this movement from monolithic to distributed. That seems to be a common theme everywhere. Parang before we're used to a monolith kasi nga that's how society was organized, very monolithic. And what we've seen over the years, with a few exceptions, is the erosion of that monolith. Now the power is more in the hands of many. But you have to be wary of anarchy, where kanya-kanya lang.
Yeah.
An example is the encyclopedia. Before, it used to be
Mm.
monolithic, na
Yes.
Britannica lang ang reliable.
Mm.
And then now it's this volunteer-led Wikipedia,
Mm. Mm.
which over the years has endured. I suspect AI may follow that trend also, where right now we're very monolithic, open AI lang, and then over the years somebody will innovate and create smaller models. So from a governance standpoint, does it work that way? Can it work that way? Because right now we're also reliant on a monolith that's not functional, like government, or a weak monolith. Kasi a parallel
Yeah.
I can explain is in the media that's happening already. We used to rely on a relatively few number of media organizations,
Mm.
and little by little they've been eroded. The trust is at an all-time low, and yet you now have these emergent parang independent journalists who seem to be holding their own. But then on the flip side, you also have this garbage vloggers. I'm not saying everyone is garbage, pero you know what I mean. Parang there are these parang vlogger slash media influencers who are also spreading disinformation. So in a way, it's hard to distribute without also getting the bad side. As opposed to you're a monolith, but then if the monolith fails, di yari ka.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that in that realm?
Yeah. Well, ano kasi ako I believe in the common good model of society.
Yeah.
And in the common good model, we follow the principle of what we call subsidiarity.
Right.
Subsidiarity means you bring decision making to the lowest level where people and stakeholders can make their voices heard
And function, yeah.
and functions can be However, this is premised on very strong education.
Right. May
Our
values ka
prob
dapat.
Yes, and the willingness to be civic participants. Our problem, which we cited at the start of our talk, is our very high power distance.
Oo.
Masyado tayong tumitingala. Ito ang problema ng Pilipino eh. 'Di ba? Andyan na si Mayor. Andyan na si
Very
May-ari.
avatar driven, no? That's really our characteristic, no?
Yes, but we have sabi nga, we're a republic eh. Sinabi na nga, ang dami na ngang heroes na namatay para sa atin. Para sabihin lang natin na Pilipino ka, you have the same right as the one who lives in Forbes Park. You have to say what you think. Diba? Hindi ka naman kailangan mag-bash, ganyan-ganyan. Pero you have to own your Otherwise, ito nga ang downside ng decentralization, no? Which is why the federalist proposal keeps coming up, diba? Gusto naman talaga ng mga tao na kasi nga, NCR ruled over the Philippines for so long, which is one of the reasons why we're so underdeveloped, di ba? Kaya lang, nung pinas yung local government code, they also saw some of the problems with devolution. If you go to some of the provinces, lahat ng binuhos na pera for development, makikita mo lahat ng mga bahay ng mga warlords, sementado lahat yung roads papunta sa kanila, then it was soil everywhere, di ba? Nakita na natin
Baka
yan.
obvious.
Oo, halatang halata, di ba? Kasi you cannot just throw money down a devolution path if you don't educate people na para sa inyo yan. Hindi yan para kay ganyan kasi siya ang mayor o siya ang governor, hindi para yan sa inyo. Oh.
You brought up a good point. Sorry, panghabol lang.
Mm.
Di ba we mentioned that we're kind of a republic, democratic republic in name, no? But
Yeah.
there are many parts of us that are still quite feudal. It's a neo-feudal
Yeah.
society,
Yeah.
especially
Correct.
outside NCR. There's a lot of
Yes.
people who have this weird notion na Philippines is very modern, but they probably just live in Metro Manila. The moment you get out of Metro Manila, you're back
Yeah.
in the 19th century.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how do you know nga, how do we instigate that change and within, let's assume the worst, you're in a feudal society somewhere region X, and you bring AI there in an environment where there isn't even the mature education system, internet connections probably spotty, the mayor or the governor and their relatives own 90% of the economy, pretty much every other gas station
Yeah, yeah.
them.
Well, eto nga, that's why we need to integrate our economy. So one is they have to have option. If they have a good enough education, they should have the option to uproot themselves and live elsewhere in the
And go
Philippines.
somewhere muna.
Oo. Then, kung ganon, makikita ng mga local governors yun and say, oh, we cannot afford to lose talent this way. That's why there will be a political contest for those who will, kasi kunyari level 5 municipality ka, ay yung katabi mo naging level 4 na, level 3 na. Sabihin ng mga tao, ano ba naman to? Ano nangyayari sa atin? Doon na tayo lumipat. Ganun naman eh. People also compete in terms of where they live based on the benefits of that locality.
Do you see any
Oh,
parang this is I don't know, an obtuse question, but do you see any parallels with another country where parang there's this weird feedback loop where people have to live somewhere else first and then bring it back home, no? Is that the pattern of most emerging economies?
well, many of our neighbors in ASEAN did that. I would say close to 90% of Koreans who studied abroad and Taiwanese who studied abroad and definitely Chinese who studied abroad come back and, apply it in their country. But tayo kasi, we're extremely adaptable. Pinakita na ni Rizal yan, di ba? Everywhere he went, he learned the language. Well, he also had a girlfriend everywhere he went. So, the point is, because we're so adaptable, sometimes hindi na bumabalik. Yun ang challenge ng Pilipino. But we can't blame also kasi nga there is so much disarray here. People's frustration level goes sky high. After the last elections, I knew many who migrated. In fact, right after election day, I was checking Google Trends. The biggest search was Canada migration. It really spiked na kagano, no? Ganun tayo. If we don't get what we want, we get frustrated eh. Sabi ko, no, you now plan for the next election. You dig in and say, teka muna, what did we do wrong? Okay. Oh, so hindi natin na ano eh. We did not
You know
really...
what? Just to share that, this is like a
Oh.
small
Hmm.
anecdote. So a few years ago, we were during the pandemic. This is my company and myself. No, we were quite active in the BARM, in the Bangsamoro region.
Hmm.
And at that time they were kind of in, I think they're still in the middle of it, but patapos na. They were in the middle of drafting their core laws pa lang. So but at the same time, we were being encouraged to kind of start the technology and analytics dialogue just as they're I mean, it's a new government basically being drafted. No? And one of the exercises that was suggested by one of the ministers is, although they appreciate that we took the effort to fly to Cotabato, there should be an equal immersion then of their experts in
Hmm.
NCR, no?
Hmm.
And that actually happened. Ano, hindi naman kami yung primary instigator. Usually mga funds yan eh, like sina UN and all that. They made that possible. So cross immersion. Immerse here, figure out what's happening here, and bring it back there. So by the same token, shouldn't we also be investing in similar technocratic exercises? Like some of our experts should actually be immersed in Silicon Valley for some time or whatnot. I
Yeah,
don't even know if that's happening. No?
definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think universities do that through their partnerships. For example, De La Salle has this joint degree with Liverpool University for a master's in data science. So they get 2 degrees. You know, if they graduate, they have an MS in data science from Liverpool and then computer science from De La Salle. Actually, kaya nga I kept flashing itong open innovation, ano, di ba? Kasi nga, in the old days, we thought innovation should come from inside the company and then you bring it to market. What is happening now nga is you really need to bring all of these external collaborators in. Ngayon, sabi nitong si Emad Mostak, yung founder ng Stable Diffusion, and he's usually on the dot with these things eh.
You know, I
By
like
next,
him. He's being attacked though, but I like him.
well, ganyan talaga. By next year daw, we will have the power of GPT-4 in our cell phone
The
and it's
phone.
not even connected to the internet.
Yeah.
Kasi nga, they will find a way to optimize even all of the
The
whatever.
parameters, make it smaller. Yeah.
Yeah, not just the parameters eh. It will carry some data na rin with it eh, which is not in the current implementation. Ano. So kasi nga the way representations of memory is being implemented, they're also doing revolutionary things with that. Oh, kasi yun yung problema, di ba? Yung context window is what 32,000 words ata eh. Pero yung nire-release ngayon, may mga 1 billion tokens na yung mga ano eh, yung mga Windows eh, yung mga latest release. Hindi mga GPTs or this other ano. So, to go back to your democratization, this will happen eh.
Yeah. It's
But we just
inevitable.
have to make sure na yung mga downside risk natin is managed.
He's covered, right? Yeah, exactly.
This is what we're saying lang, right? Hindi naman tayo mga ano eh mga wolves crying wolf. We're saying
The
in
boy who
fact
cried wolf.
we're saying we need this. This is the only way. 'Di ba? How can people become productive using the methods of the old ways? Hindi pwede. How can people be productive if they don't have access to the best ideas? I think this is what it is. It gives you access to the best ideas. But these are ideas. But whether they are true or whether they can be concretely executed, you have to work on that because they're ideas. It's like a consultant. You're talking to a consultant. He's giving you opinions, di ba? So yun. At least you have something to work on. And then you iterate, you try stuff, which brings me to the pizza thing, di ba? Nakakatuwa na every week may bago siyang ano. So, I mean, what's more creative than that? Food, right? Fusion food every week, every possible ano. That's a lot of value. People will buy, the economy will be vibrant. Kasi yun nga ang sinasabi ng mga economists, di ba? We have to create increasingly more complex products. Hindi na pwede yung mga ano lang, we really have to manufacture stuff. Although services now can become more sophisticated, the problem with services is it doesn't engage most of the economy. Kasi services is too dependent on English fluency eh.
You mean the nature of the services doesn't engage, ano? Yeah. Well, I think that's a
Oo,
structural hazard na naman siya because we
exactly.
created a
Oo.
concentration of these alien services that service everyone else except us. No?
Oo. That's why ang maganda kasi sa manufacturing, K to 12 pwede na yan. Dapat I mean, good K to 12 kasi even K to 12 is being rebooted now kasi the initial batches daw medyo may mga areas.
For me, I would want to review the PEZA charter kasi I know one of their thrusts in granting all of their whatever their benefits, no tax shields, ownership, foreign ownership caps are lifted. The proviso is, syempre, headcount. You need to hire people. And second, there has to be an IT technology transfer of some sort. I don't know to what extent that still applies to all BPOs. And I think pag sinabing IT technology transfer, in many cases, nagiging proxy lang yan for buy computers or buy hardware. But it should really be technology transfer, like methods and technology
Yeah,
materials.
you're right. I think we should look at that
Mm,
because China really insists on that.
yeah. And
Kaya
we've had
pagka,
3 decades of the
oo,
BPOs. Or hindi naman, two
yeah.
decades. Or almost 3 decades, actually.
It remains to be seen whether those transfers actually happen. Because for me, the best case is how many homegrown BPOs grew out from there. Diba?
Correct.
Sa akin yun ang best case. How many do you know?
Yeah. Like I don't know.
Diba?
Well, maybe I know at least one. No?
Mm.
Pero I don't even know if they're more of locally incorporated. Pero ano rin sila. In a way, foreign pa rin. It's hard to dissect. Maybe IBPAP should be the one to tell us.
Oo nga eh. Oo
Um,
nga eh.
kasi I know, like, I used to work in a bank BPO once upon a time. No?
Mm,
And
mm.
the technology transfer happened incidentally lang because of the skills. So you were
Oo,
training these.
oo.
So I was building an analytics hub. Eh. So that was a high value labor force. And to what extent na I can see, I mean, it's already been almost a decade since, more than. They populate a lot of the top corporations now with the knowledge they picked up from that stint. No? So
Oh,
there
there you
was some
go.
sort
Yeah.
of transfer. Pero
Yeah.
naalala ko pa rin yung curve na yan eh. I can't get over it eh. So that means I reinforced that curve, but in terms of trickle down, it didn't affect the MSMEs. Maybe in my own personal capacity, since I'm an MSME, it's helping me. Pero I'm
Yeah, kasi yun ang measure ko eh. How many setup outfits after that?
created, diba? I was created. So
Oo.
I can't say it. And I would say probably
Oo.
that like that particular office that I used to run, that was
Mm.
almost 120 people large, no?
Yeah.
Probably ranks as one of the
Mm.
most relatively successful examples of technology transfer. Na incidental lang, no? It wasn't even
Oo.
engineered. So, what more pa or what less pa anyone else who did not experience that, and it's just really low value labor being offshored to the Philippines. I don't know.
Which is typically the case.
Oo.
Diba? Kaya nga sa manufacturing, they send us the design, we just, assemble
We
this
assemble
thing.
it. We don't even design our own chips.
Oh my goodness, sabi ko, ano ba?
And this is
Eh,
already the high-end semicon
mm,
people talking ng mga
you're right, you're
relative.
right.
I mean, the last time ata we
Mm.
actually did create design and chips was during the Texas Instruments era of before
Oh,
Pinatubo
I
blew up.
see. Oo,
And then
oo.
nadali yung factory nila. That was the massive pullout after, no? Ang
Mm.
natira dito yung mga shadows of that glory days, no? And then of course, we also had the exodus of the US bases. So may dala-dalang industry rin yun na nawala. I remember we even had was it DHL or UPS was operating a regional hub here out of Clark.
I
And
know FedEx was for a while.
FedEx pala yun.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
they shut it down. Sayang, no? It would have been nice, no, to have that.
Oh, so yun, I think we need to monitor those nascent startups and how AI-enabled they will be so that their processes will be innovative. That means they can create more value. And then we need more of those. Because obviously each startup will not employ as many. That's why we need more startups.
Right. Yeah,
Diba?
I
So
think
every, oo,
I think that's the hope. Kasi
oo,
immediate economic development yan eh because you have technology there, and if the startups
mm,
start hiring, it's direct,
it's
labor.
direct. It's direct.
And
Oo.
to the extent that they disrupt industries also, that's a good question. Like I'm very happy about how e-commerce suddenly became viable. Remember before the pandemic,
Mm.
hindi mabuhay-buhay yung mga e-commerce.
Yeah, yeah. Oo. Oo.
And then now
That
automatic, forced to do it kasi you
that
can't
was
leave
the
your house.
silver lining of the pandemic, really.
Oo.
And so, well, that's also what encourages me. Kasi although I do sound utopian, what I saw during the pandemic says what is possible.
Was a glimpse, no, of what's
It
possible.
was a glimpse of what was possible. My
Oo.
God, sabi ko, biro mo, for these people who did not even take a business degree to be setting up MLMs based on something they just learned to do by watching YouTube lessons. Di
Yeah,
ba? So everything is there. Yung mga nasa baul nyo, ilabas nyo lang yan, gamitin
bring
nyo
it out
dito.
and start talking about it. Actually, that's what we're
Oo.
doing now, no? I'd love to get into like something more syempre it's good to have a banter about issues and flesh things out. But it's good if we can start teaching people also like fundamental
Yeah, oo.
about how di lang naman about AI, no, about how ethics
Mm.
works, how business works.
Value creation talaga. What we need is humanistic, innovative value creation for the common good
Yeah.
through business. Yan ang gawin natin. Let's make business an honorable, fun thing for everyone to do. It's not just for those who think that they run this country. Hindi yun eh.
You know,
Everybody,
as a
oo.
last word, no, and I'll ask
Mm.
you Ren to give a last word. I think one of the bittersweet things I have to admit um, is this is largely an age game. You know what I mean? Parang
Mm. Mm.
for those, like I'm in my 40s, so the Gen X, I'm the last of the Gen X lumalabas, no? Wala na, fait accompli na yan. You're either running big companies or you're not by that
Mm.
age, no?
Mm. Mm.
So the baton passes to the 30 somethings and the
Mm.
early 40s. That's Gen Y.
Mm.
Now they're in the thick of it right now. They're in the thick of trying to figure out their lot in life, and they have the sandwich problem then their
Mm.
parents and their kids.
Folks, yeah.
So that leaves us with Gen Z, who now need to get to grips with their digital nativeness in at a time when digital platforms are all a mess, and then education is getting disrupted by AI. Yun dapat yung effort, I think, eh. And they're quite a big cohort then. They're bigger
They
than
are.
actually.
They are. In
That that
fact,
that, that is both encouraging and also disturbing
mm,
na wala na, parang big swaths of your population pretty much are written off. The best thing you can do with them is keep them productive. Pero yung pivot mo will be certainly at below the age of 24. Parang ganun. Yun dapat ang ano.
oo. Kasi that's where the dynamism lies naman talaga eh. And,
Yeah.
and that's why I never lose hope. Kasi nga, if there's anything we do well, it's making babies, you know. We have a very young population, median age is
Very
24.
fertile
Oo,
environment,
oo.
basically.
That's why if yun lang, we just have to make sure they don't have the wrong ideas about this AI thing.
Oo.
Diba? It doesn't mean you're gonna not engage with vigorous ideas anymore and just think everything is a vending machine and ideas come out just like that. Hindi yun. Now you have a partner, you have somebody, you have something that can jog your mind, and your mind is really the main workhorse.
Yeah.
Diba? And your relationships, your networks, yeah, and then your ethics have a heart. Then we can really build this country.
That's so
Okay?
true. Okay, I think
Fantastic.
that's a good place to end. Obviously, we're begging for a third installment, but I think we covered a lot of ground.
I
So
think in the next installment we'll talk with actual entrepreneurs on how they can use AI in productive value enhancing ways.
yeah, we need to
Yeah.
talk to
Uh,
entrepreneurs, and then we need to do that AI safety powwow then with some people. No, I think we can organize that also.
yeah, that's very important.
Uh,
Although again, divided kasi dyan on the outer inner alignment issue eh. Did you see this debate between LeCun and
John LeCun
Ben and
and
Ju?
Max. Yeah, I saw that.
Oo, ganyan talaga
I
yan.
was a little disappointed by that kasi well, we should do a reaction meetup on that, no?
Oh, we should.
Kasi parang lumalabas, they all had good points, but they were straw manning each other na
That
parang
tends to happen. That tends to happen.
hindi naman na moderate kasi parang
Oo.
you guys are the best thinkers quote unquote of the field. Sana naman you have some substantial arguments. Ang nangyari, they were gaslighting each other eh.
Well, kasi nga sa safety, kasi tayo, we've moved beyond safety into value creation, di ba?
Oo.
The safety thing can really spiral to to I'm scared and you have nothing to be scared of. So gumaganyan-ganyan, di ba?
Correct.
Whereas tayo, we're saying there are safety issues and there are ways to address that, possibly through a risk management approach. But the bigger question is how do we now use this to create value?
Tama, tama.
Yun eh, that could moderate it. But there was no business voice there in that audience. They were
Yeah.
really just talking about the safety issues.
Yeah,
So,
tsaka it's the doomerism which is
yeah,
also
exactly.
unwarranted. And then yung isa naman parang denialism naman yung nangyari
Exactly.
na
Ayun nga, naging pendulum, parang naging binary.
oo.
Pero business, I'm a believer that business finds a way to consolidate this. Diba? Kaya nga engineering for me is the perfect model eh. You make it safe, and then you build the buildings, and then we make life better for everyone. It doesn't mean don't build a building high because it might fall. You don't reason that way, right?
Correct, correct.
You reason how deep should the foundation be so it doesn't fall, di ba?
Yeah.
Kami nga, nag-retrofit kami nung campus namin, parang sa mga Japanese, yung may mga rubber sa ilalim, pag may earthquake, the building doesn't move anymore because it's the ground underneath that moves.
Oo, tama.
Oo, di
You
ba?
use physics for your
Exactly. Ganyan dapat. Eh sa Japan nga, yung mga buildings nila, may pendulum sa taas, may counterweight, gumaganon.
galing nga eh.
Ang galing, ano? So there is always a way to engineer safety. But
Yeah,
you cannot engineer it if you don't even acknowledge
you
that
don't
there's a
acknowledge the issues.
problem.
Exactly
Oh,
right.
tayo we have to.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay, sige,
Fantastic.
thanks Sir Ben.
Always a pleasure, Doc.
We will schedule a third installment for sure.
Okay, looking forward to the three-way on safety. Bye
All right.
now.